There may be no other name more closely associated with sharing unpopular truth than my next guest, Jaymie Icke. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you again, Jaymie. Now, since our last conversation, you've founded Ickonic Media, and you've just released your first film. What can you tell us about the process and what people can expect to see when they view Unnatural?
Well, we launched in November, the channel Ickonic, because, as you've said, I've always, with the surname, always been brought up with the alternative look on life and the fact that, I always look at things from another perspective. And I feel there's so many areas across society that just don't get equal coverage. You're allowed to hear one side of a debate, one side of an argument. If you're talking about the other side, it's either censored or suppressed or you're attacked. So one of the subjects I'm really passionate about is technology, because I think I've grown up in the generation where we've seen technology go from pretty much nothing to everything in the short space of 15, 20 years that it has since the internet came up and cell phones become such widespread use. And you very rarely see people talking about the potential implications of that from either a health perspective of the radiation or a social perspective of how that's changed the interaction between people, how it's changed the development of relationships, and how it's changed people's development from a young age, where they're dealing with technology from such a young time. And I felt that there was definitely something that was brewing in this area with the impending rollout of 5G. That seemed to have galvanized a lot of activist groups around the world to stand up and fight back. So I thought it was a topic that really needed looking at, especially with that technology quite imminently being rolled out and in some cases being rolled out around the world. So the audience can expect to see two things from this film. Rather than just start with a film about 5G technology saying, look, this is coming and it's dangerous, we thought we'd actually talk about what we have now. So right from when the internet first came through, the first cell phones, GSM, 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, all these things that we have available now, we thought we'd look at the impacts that they're having. And the various scientists and doctors that I have in the film from 7 countries around the world all conclude that there's a significant danger, risk, and significant evidence to show that the technology we have now is causing health issues in people. Forget 5G for a second. What we have now at the lower power is causing health issues. And then another aspect you can expect to see is the social implications of this technology. We have a psychologist from the UK and a psychologist from the US talking about how, look at the things we've seen explode in the last decade. The inability of young people to build and form meaningful relationships, concentration spans are decreasing, IQs are decreasing, where kids climb trees, they now stare at screens. I think we can all probably say you go out for meals and, well, not at the moment, but you go out for meals and you look in restaurants at young families and parents aren't even talking to their kids are on iPads, and it's become almost like a free babysitter. And I think it's very, very dangerous. And it's not a world that I'd like to see continue.
I agree with you, Jaymie. And, you've also become a father since our last interview. This is definitely a phenomenon that everyone has observed. Well, I certainly can't speak for everyone, but I have observed it. And I've often wondered what these children will be like when they're adults. They are so trapped in their own world. And I appreciated that about the film, that you're not just talking about the electromagnetic radiation and how this can actually affect the cells, but the social implications of this, just constant staring at a screen. And as you pointed out, it's really amplified now that we're living in this world where, certainly in the United States and in New York where I am, they're talking about, postponing the school year and how they're going to have these children learning from home. I mean, these are really serious concerns for parents. Obviously, learning information is one aspect of going to school, but the social interaction from such a young age, I mean, taking a year out of the life of a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old has unknown impact. We haven't even begun to see what this is going to do. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to know Jaymie, that just at the outset of the show, we're already experiencing a variety of disruptions with people trying to, penetrate the Skype call and various things happening that I'm mitigating as we speak. But talk a little bit, if you could, about how you feel as a father and the impact that this is having.
Well, it's a subject that I was very interested in before we started making the film. And in making it, I thought I actually knew a little bit about this, and I realized I knew nothing. And I've had a fantastic education through this from the various doctors and scientists that we have in this. And one thing that's very clear is that young people, pregnant women and children are much more susceptible to the dangers of this technology for a variety of reasons, both socially and physically. So becoming a father, I felt it was something that really needed to be addressed. When you see one of the doctors makes the point in the film that you see 2-3-year-olds using technology better than their parents do. And I think that's terrifying, absolutely terrifying, because as we've said, the social interaction, the social development's not going to be anything like the same, because you're getting that interaction from a machine, not from a human being. And also the fact that young people, your skulls are thinner, you absorb more radiation, you're more susceptible to the damaging effects of electromagnetic frequencies. I think we have to start with the kids, because it's the kids that are really attacked with this from the perspective of it being brilliant, it being the next big thing, more technology after more technology. One day you'll be able to touch the side of your head and your phone menu will appear in front of you as magic, as in almost like virtual reality. We're being sold that this is brilliant, this is great. And there's absolutely no evidence from a physical perspective, first of all, to show the long-term dangers of this implication, because the long-term dangers of this technology, because in a sense, we've not had a full generation of it yet. The internet came in the late 80s, but the really widespread use of cell phones and so on hasn't really happened until the late 2000s, when the first iPhone came out. So you're talking 15, 20 years tops that this technology has been around, really less than that in such widespread use. So you've not even had a quarter of a generation to monitor the long-term health implications of it. So that's why I'm very passionate about it, because I feel that it's something that you can't escape. If you believe that smoking is bad for you, you believe drug taking is bad for you, and alcohol is bad for you, you cannot drink, you cannot smoke, and you cannot take drugs. But you cannot use technology. But when you walk out in the street, you're still getting it from cell towers, you're still getting it from satellites in the out in space. And if I logged onto my phone here right now, I'm sure it'd be the same for yourself, especially with you living in New York. And for most people watching these, you'll pick up 10, 12, 15 Wi-Fi signals on that single device. So you're getting hammered all the time from multiple different Wi-Fi and electromagnetic frequencies. So you can't really escape it. And even if you are like myself and like the people that are interested in this kind of area, that it's a risk, you still can't really do anything about it, apart from try and be cautious, turn your Wi-Fi off unless you're using it, or even better, don't have Wi-Fi, use wired connections. Turn your cell phone off at night, keep it the other side of the room to you. But you're still going to have that exposure. So they've rolled out this worldwide new frequency and new thing without really having any long-term testing, having any long-term knowledge of what it's going to do, and without having people's consent, because it's not something you can pick up and put down. It's there whether you want it or not.
That's right. And a lot of people have become very concerned with 5G, as you brought up. And I think the primary concern is the use of millimeter wave technology and the similarities that seems to display when compared to active denial military systems. A lot of people are, as you said, very concerned that there hasn't been a lot of testing. And in the film, you speak to doctors who speak about 3G and 4G existing frequencies, and 5G is going to bombard us now with a new frequency. Some of these studies weren't even started until the 1990s, and as you said, we don't have a full generation. What would you say was your biggest concern after making the film that perhaps you didn't even know about when you started?
I think a massive concern is the impacts the current frequencies are having. Because as I said at the start, 5G seems to have galvanized a lot of activist groups around the world. And there seems to be a real uneasiness about 5G. And I think part of that is the health implications that people are starting to see. And I think the other part of it is people are saying, why do we need this? Brilliant, I can stream my movie a little bit quicker, but why else do we need it? What we have now is more than adequate. So I think that was where we kind of started the idea of the film. It was going to lead towards 5G, and then when we got into it and we discovered the dangers and the implications going back to the early 20th century, when radars and so on became widespread use with the military and with aviation, the issues that we're seeing now in the general population, they were happening then in places like Russia, for example, where radars were one of the first places to be widespreadly used for military purposes. You saw the same kind of cancers, the same kind of tumors, the same kind of issues that we're seeing now in the general populace. So this isn't old. The dangers around this technology, the knowledge about the danger of this technology is nothing old. It's just becoming more widespread and widely known because it's the technology, as I said, you can't escape. So more people are exposed. So more people are getting these conditions.
Yeah.
The interesting thing with 5G, as you mentioned there, and millimeter waves, is it's a completely new type of technology. People assume that 3G, 4G, 5G, they're just different numbers and they follow on from each other. Whereas 5G is a completely different type of technology using millimeter waves, as you've said. Now, one of the dangers of millimeter waves, one of the dangers of 5G, which is not being discussed, is that the safety limits that are provided that most Western countries use are by an organization called Ickonic. Now, they're all based on averages. So they're based on the average exposure that a person will have. Whereas with 5G technology, it's about they have a sharp spike in a wave. So, for example, you have a long period of nothing, then you have a sharp spike, then you have a long period of nothing in terms of the frequency. So the overall exposure over a period of time is not that high. So therefore, the average, they say, is safe. But it's the sharp spike that's the problem. So a doctor in the film called Klaus Buchner, who's a member of the European Parliament, a doctor out of Germany, uses a great analogy of that, which is if you take a balloon, a blown up balloon, and I put a pressure on it with the full force of my hand, I won't pop it. But if I direct that same amount of pressure and target it around a pin, the balloon will pop. And It's that principle that we have massive concerns about with 5G.
It's a very good analogy. And of course, people can see the film today on Ickonic.com. Can you tell people some details, Jaymie, about how they're going to get the film?
Well, it's actually available. It's actually available tomorrow, I should say.
Tomorrow, sorry. There's a time difference. You're in the UK. My bad.
Tomorrow from 4 p.m. UK time. So where you are, you'll be able to watch it from early evening in New York and East Coast. So, so you can go onto Ickonic, as you can see on the screen there, and you get a 7-day free trial, and you can watch the film. The idea of the channel is to create a safe place for alternative content where it's not going to be censored, it's not going to be altered, and there's nothing that can't be covered. If something can be factually substantiated with a good argument, and it's interesting for people to see, and it's information they're not going to hear on the mainstream, that's what we want to cover. So there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of material on there across the world of science, pseudoscience, healthcare, politics, transformational content. Think of it as an alternative Netflix where we won't run away from any kind of content.
That's great. Now, you and I have been speaking about this for more than a year, actually, and as I recall, you ran into some kind of problem with censorship and all the type of big tech stuff. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so basically, we didn't start the channel with a massive pot of funding to be able to build all these great systems from day one. The page you're actually looking at right now went live a couple of hours ago. My
Wow.
Developers were working really hard on that for the last couple of weeks, so to get that out ahead of the film. So basically, what we've done is every month we've with subscribers increasing, we've been able to improve and improve and improve. So for the first short period the channel was up, we used Vimeo to host our videos, and then used private embed codes onto the channel so they couldn't be shared and viewed anywhere else.
Right.
And yeah, out of the blue, very early in the lockdown, I forget exactly now, but middle of March, I believe, Vimeo deleted our account with no warning at all. And yeah, all the videos disappeared from the channel. Fortunately, we were working on our own video player anyway, so we weren't kind of starting from scratch, and we were able to get everything back up within sort of 24, 48 hours. Which is great. You know, it's now we're completely secure. We have full control over what goes on there. There's no censorship at all. Like I say, every single system that we have is our own, and there's no third party that can censor the message, that can dictate the message. And that's why I think, and some people will probably disagree, that the subscription model is a really good model for that. Because generally with mainstream television and filmmaking, you've got three models. You've got the state-sponsored model, which is, as you see the BBC here in Britain and so on. You've got the commercial model where you sell ads. And then you've got the subscription model. And I think this is the only model where you can guarantee there's no censorship. You can guarantee there's no influence, because your funding comes from your subscribers and your viewers. And if they don't like what you're doing, they're not going to subscribe, and therefore you're not going to have a channel. There's nothing dictating what I can make and I can get my team to make, apart from the libel laws. That's literally it. Whereas if I run a commercial channel and I have 5 advertisers paying me £1,000 a month, and there's a story about one of them, am I going to run it? Because if I run it, I might lose 20% of my income. And it's the same with obviously the state-sponsored model. Your funding comes from the state, so therefore that's going to have a massive impact on your message, because you know where your bread is buttered. Whereas subscription model, we can do whatever we like, and we're quite interactive with our subscribers in terms of the content we make. They have an input in what we make, and I want that to continue, whether we have 1,000 members, 10,000 members, or 1 million members.
You and I absolutely agree on this, Jaymie. It's very important that people understand that. There is this misconception that when you're watching material on YouTube, it's free. But that's not true. Running a video service, as you've set up, is very complicated, requires a lot of resources. I think most people who are familiar with you and your father's work are going to recall that he was a broadcaster on the BBC. Boris Johnson has spoken about defunding the BBC, eliminating the television tax that basically forces every UK citizen who wants to have a television to sponsor the overt penchant for pedophilia that's displayed right outside the BBC. Too many B's there, sorry. I got an echo in my ear. But there's been a lot of controversy about statues here in the United States, and as far back as 2012, as far as I'm aware, British citizens were up in arms about this display, this sculpture produced by Eric Gill, the highly controversial artist who created that. But certainly whoever is sponsoring, providing the funding, they're going to control the content, whether the viewers realize that or not. So by creating a model in the way that you have on Ickonic.com, for a nominal fee, people can buy back their ability to see content that they can trust. Because as you said, if there's anything on there that they don't like, they just vote with their pocketbook, and certainly the source will not be around for very long.
No, absolutely. And interesting you mentioned the BBC, because today a story has come out where they've announced they're going to scrap free license fees for over 75s. So they'll be expected to pay now, which hasn't been the case for a while. Yeah, the BBC are a classic example of a clearly massively influenced station. Their coverage of this lockdown, for example, I was in America, over in Colorado, just before the lockdown started. And I watched a little bit of the coverage over there. But since we've been back in the UK, the coverage has been atrocious. If the media had done their job, this lockdown would have been over 3 months ago. Well, it probably would have never happened in the first place. But yeah, the BBC are a perfect example of that. Their message is massively influenced. So there's so many areas they wouldn't talk about, they wouldn't cover. They've posted some stories during this lockdown about the connections between 5G and coronavirus being completely, there being no connection whatsoever, which I'm not saying there is, but I'm not saying there's not, because there's no proof either way at the moment. So you can't just say something's not true because you don't like it. You have to prove that's not true.
Now, do you find it ironic, Jaymie, that we've heard throughout the world that COVID-19 is particularly dangerous to those over 75 who might have other pre-existing ailments, and now, in a totally opposite move to what Boris Johnson was suggesting, as I understand it, the Prime Minister wanted to make this a voluntary subscription service like HBO or any other television company that people pay to view. But instead now they're mandating that people over 75, who very often are living on retirement or a fixed income, I don't know about the United Kingdom versus the United States, but there's a lot of people who are over 75 who this £157 fee, I mean, that's basically $200. That's per year or per month? How often would they pay that?
That'll be per year.
It's still a fee that perhaps some people who don't even want to watch television might not. I guess you just don't buy a TV. It's just ridiculous that they're forcing you to pay for what is essentially propaganda. As you said, they don't show you both sides of an argument. They've got a message that they want you to. Perhaps you've seen this image outside the BBC. It's another sculpture created by Eric Gill that basically instructs observers of the thing to absculta, which means they must listen and obey. Are you aware of this bizarre sculpture here?
No, I've not seen that before. Actually, that's very terrifying to look at. Actually, it looks very sinister. Very.
We've evaluated this, and I don't know if you're familiar with David Hawkins. He's a co-host on another show here on Crowdsource the Truth, but he believes that this is a sort of a sexualization of a Christ-like figure, and these two angels are holding this book with the Latin word absculta, which means listen and obey, and they're kind of high-fiving each other behind here. A bizarre, blasphemous type of piece of imagery that United Kingdom citizens are forced to pay for.
Yeah, quite possibly. Then nothing would surprise me at the BBC. So.
Now, I want to ask you another question. I don't know if you delved into this, but we know that technology is king in the modern world, and there's one of the, forgive me if I'm mutilating royalty, but perhaps one of the dukes in this kingdom is Elon Musk, and his SpaceX company has been launching these Starlink satellites that intend to be competition for mass communications of all kinds, internet, broadcast, telephone. I understand this uses a vastly different technology than the phased, pulsed, high-frequency, shortwave transmissions of 5G. Has this come into your sphere? Is this in the movie at all? Do you know about Starlink, and what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I've heard of it. We don't delve too much into that area. We wanted to keep the film very much almost not mainstream, but looking at it from a mainstream scientific perspective. It's the kind of film that you could put onto a mainstream television channel, and any of the scientists in it they'd actually possibly listen to with some credibility, which I think was a good way to start the debate, start the argument. So I've not really gone into that. We have delved a little bit towards the end of the film into another graphic you showed a second ago about the connection between AI and into the human brain. We do touch on that slightly because that's actually being talked about, as I'm sure you're aware, by Google futurists, that having nanotechnology in our brain to help us be, and in their words, superhuman and think in the cloud is going to be the next technology. It's going to be the next thing rolled out, which is, I think, an absolutely terrifying thought. And
yeah.
One of my concerns with people like Elon Musk is that he says, AI could be the end of humanity, but we have to merge with it to save ourselves, which makes absolutely no sense. And also he's producing lots of technologies which seem to further that goal of connecting the human brain to AI. And as I said a few minutes ago about the fact that the kids are the really important ones because we're being sold the fact that this is brilliant. It's the kids today, it's kids like my son and probably myself, to be honest. By the time we get to middle age, that they want this system in, that they want there to be technology literally integrated into the human body. So in terms of getting this information out there to warn of that, we haven't really got an unlimited amount of time. The time is now, absolutely now.
It's a tricky thing, of course, because while I agree with what you're saying, we're already in this world where cybernetic organisms, people whose lives are dependent on technology, it's already prevalent. We've got defibrillators and pacemakers and all kinds of electronic implantable devices, cochlear implants that help deaf people hear. And of course, we all want the benefits of this technology. Elon Musk is an enigmatic figure in my view. He says a lot of things that I am intrigued by. I mean, certainly this Neuralink technology aims to merge, as you said, the human brain with nanotechnology by injecting this chip and connecting transistors, or I don't know what we would call these things, but basically wiring up your brain with a machine that, I don't know if people can see that, but is literally injecting wires into the neurons of your brain. Now, Musk has spoken about how this could allow people who are injured to regain the ability to walk, people who are blind to regain the ability to see. And certainly for people who suffer from those things, is a promising technology that people could very well be interested in exploring and developing. But as you said, when we hear about companies like Google, the same companies that want to suppress your message and, throw me off of YouTube for putting up a video that they don't like, if they start to have the ability to directly interface with your brain, I don't think that we, as mere mortals, can even contemplate what those computer applications might look like in the future. And when you speak about your young child, you think about the older generation now. Somebody's grandmother or grandfather might not have a computer on their desk or might not have an iPhone in their pocket. Although we're actually moving further away from that, someone who's born into a world where this technology already exists is just going to accept it as given and take it wholeheartedly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that's really important to point out is, if you think about the history of the Earth being millions, probably possibly billions of years old, if you go back to 1988 when the internet was launched, so 22 years ago, someone had gone into 32 years ago, someone had gone into a coma and woken up today, you couldn't begin to explain the transformation in terms of the technology that was there then to the technology that was there now. The fact that we've gone from not even having the internet not even existing, to then all of a sudden it being implanted into our brains by 2030 is the year that a lot of these people are talking about, but it being implanted into our brains 42 years after the original concept has come up, and you've changed the entire human society. I find that staggering again, because where's the evidence to show that that's safe, firstly? And one thing you talk about there, which is the medical aspect, which is an area where technology has been incredibly helpful. And I'll start by saying I'm not anti-technology. I just want safe technology.
Right.
I do believe that technology has a place, and there's a saying in the film, which is technology does have a place, but as the servant, not the master. And I feel once that goes into your brain, and to a large extent, particularly with younger people, cell phones, they're the master now. Social media is the master now rather than the servant. I think the relationship between technology and us is incredibly important. I don't think that relationship is healthy at the moment. So, as you say, on the medical field, it's created some fantastic breakthroughs. You said there people that can't walk might be able to walk again. That's a great idea. But then my counter to that would be, why do me and you need it then? Why do 95% of the world need that in their brain? Why not? It's almost a good parallel to the coronavirus, where they were talking about sheltering the vulnerable. So do that then, shelter the vulnerable, and let the rest of the world carry on as normal, and don't crash the world economy and cause more destruction by doing that. It's the same principle with the technology that they want to roll out that can supposedly do things like make people walk again, cure neurological issues and other health problems. I'm very, very skeptical as to whether that can do that in the first place. But if it can, why not start by doing that with the people that actually need it, the war veterans, the people that are suffering from those sort of things where they can't walk or they can't stand up, they can't speak. There's no need for the rest of the population to have that, because it would, firstly, where's the proof it's safe? It would completely change the landscape of the world. It would completely change relationships. And as you pointed out with Google, how do you know what influence they have to put through the technology? You think about what we have now. When people talk about a certain thing, a certain product, a certain place, a certain idea, how many people then see an advert for that next time they go online, next time they go on Facebook? So what if you bypass the cell phone, you bypass the talking, and you bypass the advert, and they can actually put that idea straight into your brain, and you'll think you've had an idea. Oh, I should go to Daytona Beach tomorrow on holiday. Well, how do you know you've thought of that? How do you know you've thought of that? You know, the opportunity for manipulation would be something I don't think we could even begin to comprehend.
You're absolutely right, Jaymie, and I hadn't thought about it exactly in that way. I think the problem is, this is already happening. The precursor to Elon Musk's Neuralink is something called the Utah Array, which is a scary-looking device that literally gets implanted into the brain, and as I understand it, is currently being tested with people with severe disabilities. And here we see a woman who's confined to a wheelchair, who's able to operate a robotic arm with her thoughts. And this is an early example of how these types of applications that would allow the disabled to perhaps become more mobile. Now, something interesting also that you just brought up. I remember in 2015, there was a lot of hype about how, Back to the Future, the 1980s movie, had initially started where the main character goes back in time to 1955, but then in a sequel goes forward in time to 2015. So a lot of people were comparing how the film envisioned 2015 to how 2015 actually turned out. And it's sort of obvious we don't have flying cars. People weren't necessarily walking around with USB-powered sneakers and things like that. And I had a conversation with my father. I asked him if he felt that there had been a greater technological advance from 1955 to 1985, or if he felt there was a greater technological advance from 1985 to 2015. And my initial thought was that it was 1955 to 1985, because in 1955, basically, very few people had even a television, and by 1985, a lot of people had Walkmans, and everybody had radios in their cars and all that kind of thing. But my father disagreed. He said the invention of the internet and all the technology that flowed out of that was far more than anything that happened between the 50s and the 80s, and I think he's right.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, as I said a few minutes ago, I think you'd struggle to explain this transformation to somebody who hadn't witnessed it, because the scale of it is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And I think having people of your father's generation and my father's generation and so on is very important, because they can provide a barometer between what life was like and what it is like now. I think possibly people around my age, 27, 28, are probably the last generation that can remember what a childhood was like without technology. I think I had my first mobile phone when I started walking to school on my own when I was probably about 13, 14. Whereas now, the majority, I can't remember the exact statistic, but the percentage of children that have their own smartphone under the age of 10 is incredibly high, ridiculously high.
Right.
Which, you look at that two ways. You're giving someone under the age of 10 a £400 device for a start. So $400, $500 device. So since when is that necessary? Firstly, so the financial aspect is, I find, absolutely staggering. And also, why do you need that? Why do you need that? There's absolutely no need, because if you're under that age, you're probably not out on your own. You're probably not in a scenario where you're not with your parents very often, or if you are, you're going to probably be at a friend's house where their parents are going to be there. You're very rarely in a situation where you're probably in any danger on your own. You need to get hold of a parent or an adult. So why do you need a smartphone? And I think a lot of it is behavior control. It's a free babysitter for parents. And I think it has given parents the opportunity to be lazy. It really has. Right. And there's no escape from it. You can take that with you, and that can. I saw this the other day. I was in doing some filming, and in a local gymnasium over here with a fitness show that we do. And there was a guy that came in to do a workout, brought his son, who was probably about 8 or 9, and just stuck him on an iPad for an hour while he did that. And it's, some people might be listening and saying that that's fine, and that's people's opinions. But for me, I see that as lazy parenting, and I don't think that long-term kids will develop in the same way. And there's significant evidence to show that. There's a section in the film where we focus on the effects on young people of social media and of cell phone and technology use. And one scientist talks about the fact that when you get a text, or when you get something that is stimulating from technology, you release a chemical called dopamine, which most people have heard of dopamine. It's the same chemical that's released when we drink, when we gamble, when we take drugs, all those sort of things. So it's very, very addictive. And you're getting kids addicted to chemicals like dopamine through the overuse of cell phones and social media at such a young age. And the dangers of that is that if you take alcohol, for example, most alcoholics generally discover alcohol when they're teenagers, largely not through their own fault. But then that becomes hardwired because our brains have neuroplasticity, sorry. And when you do the same thing again and again, that becomes hardwired. So when you become stressed, when you become overworked through whatever might cause that, you're generally going to turn to alcohol rather than turning to another person. And what I think you're going to find as this generation addicted to technology grow up is they're going to turn to technology when they're stressed. They're going to turn to technology when they need help, when they need support, rather than turning to other people. And I think that sets an incredibly dangerous precedent where you're going to have a lot of people that are suffering from various different types of stresses, conditions, illnesses, mental health problems that use technology rather than confiding in people to help their problems. And I don't think anyone can deny the explosion in the mental health crisis around the world at the moment in men, women, young children. The suicide rates of young people is extraordinary around the world.
Yeah.
And I believe technology and social media and the overuse and overstimulation because of those technologies and industries is a massive factor in that, a massive factor. And I don't think near enough is being done to look at it. And one point I wanted to make as well, which you spoke about earlier on, is about schools and education. Interestingly, there's actually evidence to show that the schools that go the most technology based, where technology is massively used or overused, shall I say, there's no evidence to show that they're producing the best grades, the best thinkers, the greatest minds. There's no evidence to show that the increasing use of technology has actually done anything for the development of young people. And there's actually evidence to show it's been detrimental particularly in hand motor skills and things like that. In mathematics, it's been incredibly detrimental as well. So I think this is something that needs looking at. It needs looking at, and it needs a widespread public inquiry, because there's been very little work done on it at all. Very little work done.
And your new film, Unnatural, available on Ickonic.com, goes into great detail about all of these subjects. I think the example that you brought up of the guy at the gym with his young kid, it's almost like digital proximal abandonment, because I wonder how would that child develop differently if perhaps instead of going to the gym and putting on his headphones and putting the kid there with an iPad and headphones, what if the father played cricket or baseball with that kid and that was the workout, and they would bond and they'd be outside breathing fresh air and learning more about each other and all that. I mean, we see all these photographs I'm bringing up that just show children who are, I guess, playing together, but they're just not even looking at each other. They're not even interfacing with each other. They're not learning any of the interpersonal skills that are so critical at these young ages. And in addition to relying on the technology and zoning out, I mean, you're talking about a lot of the really high-level kind of psychological effects, but we haven't even begun to discuss what about the physical effects. I know for me, and I'm approaching 50, when I spend too much time looking at the computer screen or particularly the phone, I feel physical discomfort with my eyes focusing so closely on something that's generating light in my face. And I wonder, you know, I started interfacing with these devices when I was a young teenager, simply because that's when they were invented. I mean, not the smartphone, but the computer and everything. I mean, these children who grow up with it, what's happening with their eyesight? What's happening with their posture? We can see even just in this photo that children are hunched over these devices. I know I sometimes, when I'm looking down at the phone too much, I have to remind myself, hey, wait a minute, my neck is starting to ache. It's a lot of concerns.
There is massive concerns, and as I said towards the beginning, is the radiation, which is obviously the main physical implication of this technology, is much more damaging to young children because you're much more susceptible to it when you're younger, and pregnant women are up there again with the most susceptible. So the process that is caused by these EMF and electromagnetic frequencies is a process called oxidative stress. It's basically where the frequencies upset the calcium-potassium balance within the cells and can damage the cells. And mainstream studies, of which we quote one called the EU Reflex study in 2004, we quote in the film, actually concludes that. It states that. And it states that it can cause damage to DNA. But then it goes on to say we can't guarantee this causes harm. But one thing that's funny is they can't guarantee it doesn't either. And they talk about monitoring the long-term impacts. And since then, there's been very little technology on it. You brought up part of it there. So there's clearly evidence to show that this does interact with our cells, and it does cause damage to DNA and cause issues within the cells. And young people, you're more susceptible to that. Now, one of the main scientific claims from the mainstream is that you've got the electromagnetic spectrum with visible light in the middle. To the right, you've got ionizing radiations, things like gamma rays, X-rays, things like that you're exposed to when you go and take an X-ray for a short period. To the left, you've got non-ionizing radiations, which they claim have a different effect on the living cell. They claim they can't interact with cells in the same way, so therefore they can't cause things like cancer. However, within our DNA, when our cells replicate, which as most of us will know what happens on a regular basis, that's what aging is. Your cells replicate, and they don't replicate quite as good each time, and that's what aging is. When your DNA unwinds and winds back in again, when that process happens, you're about 1,000 times more susceptible to external systems, things like radio frequencies and microwaves and electromagnetic frequencies. So when you live in effectively a hub of that, which anyone living in a city would, most people living in towns and villages would, when there's towers and Wi-Fi in most houses, you're going to be more susceptible to that on a regular basis. So therefore, there's massive evidence to show that it does damage DNA and it does cause physical harm. You've only got to look at the rates of cancers alone, and not just cancer, types of cancer. Cancers in the frontal lobe, where you're holding your phone to your ear all the time, a few inches away from your brain. The damage to sperm rates in men when they have their phones in their front pockets. There's massive amounts of clear evidence to show that this has a very large physical implication. And it's nowhere, like as I say, nowhere near enough work's being done on it. Electromagnetic frequencies are classed as type 2 carcinogens, which means potentially cancerous, or something to be very cautious about. But you look around you. Are we cautious? I mean, I imagine, how many devices have you got in front of you now, Jason? 4,
More
5?
than I can count. Yeah, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, many.
And every single one of those is picking up those 10, 12 Wi-Fi signals. Your neighbor's probably got at least 2 or 3.
Many more than that. I'm living in a courtyard of an apartment building in New York City. When I turn on the Wi-Fi, the list exceeds what the computer is able to show you. You have to scroll down to see them all.
Exactly. So you can't escape it. You absolutely can't escape it. Even when you're sleeping, you can't escape it. Your mobile phone is, even when you're not using it, it's in your pocket. It's constantly communicating to keep the date right, to keep the time right, to keep your location right, to keep your apps up to date. It's constantly communicating back to cell towers, and that's happening every single second of the day. So you're surrounded by it, absolutely bathed in it. And as I said at the start, with other things that we consider dangerous, drinking, smoking, drug taking, all those sort of things, you can choose not to do them. You can choose to stand away from somebody smoking, but you can't with technology. And there's a massive parallel, which we've used in the film to conclude, between the smoking industry and technology, because the smoking industry, as we know, when it first came out, it was this sexy thing, and celebrities were having pictures with cigarettes and how brilliant it was. And it took so long and so many people to get cancer, so many lives to be lost, so many parents to not see their kids grow up, so many kids not see their parents grow old, grandparents dying and all that, before there was finally an advert about how dangerous smoking was. And then it took even longer to get the adverts about passive smoking and how dangerous that was to people around them. Now, use that analogy in technology, because the whole world is passive smoking. Without being consent, without displaying any consent, you're surrounded by it. And whether you like it or not, you're getting hit with it, you're getting hammered by it, and you're exposed. And 5G is just going to take that to a completely another level. And as you were talking about the impact, the physical impacts, there's a condition known as EHS, electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Now, these are the people that suffer tremendously as a result of this technology, with lots of various different conditions, things like headaches, things like dizziness, things like swelling of the joints. And the World Health Organization semi-recognized that this condition exists. They call it, I can't remember the exact terminology, but they don't conclude that it's down to technology. They say the symptoms are real, but they call it, as you say, pseudo. They say it's a pseudo illness. So they agree the symptoms are real, but they say they don't conclude what it is down to. And since the massive increase in technology, EHS has exploded. And the number of people that are going to suffer with things like this when 5G is rolled out will skyrocket, absolutely skyrocket, particularly in densely populated areas like where you are in Manhattan and inner cities and places where you can't escape the technology.
I'm becoming concerned that other things exploding might cause me to meet my demise before 5G is even complete with rolling out, but I'm not minimizing what you're saying. It's a very important area for us to continue to discuss and explore because, as you say, we can't escape it, and certainly with each of the technologies that get introduced, the automobile, there's a benefit to it, and then there's a risk and a danger. People, I think, enjoy the ability to drive and go where they want and have food delivered. It's allowed human society to develop in areas that might not have been able to, but at the same time, they're burning things and putting things into the atmosphere that have long-term effects in the same way that some of these technologies might. We've got a lot of people commenting with us here, Jaymie, and I want to remind everybody as the audience watching live grows that the new film is called UNNATURAL, and people can watch it starting tomorrow on Ickonic.com. It's an alternative video streaming network that is essentially like a new Netflix that allows you to see information that those type of Marxist organizations are trying to control and prevent you from seeing because they are very fearful of alternative ideas, alternative opinions, argumentation, or anything that challenges the mainstream. Some of the topics that are going by in our chat right now, Jaymie, people are talking about Facebook and how this was introduced maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and it seemed like this fun, dopey way that you can communicate with your friends, and teenagers were into it and whatever. But these things have now permeated our lives. When we talk about social media and Twitter, we've got the President of the United States, perhaps the most well-known and active Twitter user in the world. It's become just so embedded in our society that there's no escaping from it, as you said, even if you're not a user. And this is what I mean, that regular average people who just use computers cannot really envision future applications. I remember when I was very young and we had a family computer, a new type of computer came out that was much faster, and I said, hey, we should get this new computer, Dad. It's faster. And he said, what the hell do you need faster? Where are you going? He didn't understand the concept, but every time processing speed increases, storage capacity increases, network bandwidth increases. It's not just about downloading the latest movie faster. These types of paradigm shifts enable applications that we literally cannot envision right now. Now, the developers of these applications who are at Google dealing with these, massive quantum computer, big data, parallel processing applications, I think they know what's coming down the pipe, but it's difficult for us to know. And when it's presented to us as, hey, this is a cute way to put, dog ears on your photograph and text your friends or whatever, that seems innocuous, perhaps in the same way that restoring movement to the paralyzed or sight to the blind might usher in this brain interface technology, but it's a slippery slope, and I think you've raised a lot of important concerns.
Yeah, well, you think about if you're trying to bring in something that you want to be a way of controlling people and controlling a narrative, you're not going to bring it in with that. You're going to bring it in as this cool thing that everyone should use because it's great. And that's, as you say, how Facebook started. That's how YouTube started. YouTube was a great video sharing site where you could post what you like. You got paid if people liked you. And obviously, as that's progressed and progressed, now they're censoring anything alternative. They're even censoring gaming people like PewDiePie and people like that. So it doesn't start off where it's meant to end. And now Facebook's at the point where it's starting to censor alternative content. People are already addicted to it. It's already ingrained in their lives, as you say. Most people don't text now. Most people use Messenger to exchange messages. They don't use old-fashioned text messages. That's how ingrained Facebook is, that it's the main form of communication. It's the main way people get their news, which is one argument that we've made about the censorship of people, particularly in a pandemic like this, where most people are using that and Twitter and so on to get their fix on the world, get their news. They can't be claimed to be private organizations. They've got to be considered public utilities because people are using them to get their news. Therefore, they should not have the free rein to censor anything that they don't agree with. But as you say, it's become so integrated and so ingrained that almost people don't see the downside. People like us do, that are interested in alternative information and that have suffered as a result of these technologies and these companies censoring. But the vast majority of people don't. I don't think they see it. I think it's almost like cognitive dissonance. They think these things are great and they don't see the downside, which I think's really terrifying, given it's not subtle anymore. These massively influencing things.
Well, you've hit it on the head. I mean, it's an ongoing debate here in the United States as the election approaches. You know, these things are, for many people, not only their primary source of information, but perhaps their sole source of information. I was just banned from Twitter last night for posting my opinion. You know, Alexander Vindman, the Army, whatever the hell he is, that testified against President Trump in what is now quite clearly a ginned up bit of nonsense to try to get him impeached. I shared my opinion that this individual, as a member of the Army, should be tried for treason, for presenting false testimony against the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Army, and I believe, if found guilty, the penalty for that is death. So I said this guy should be charged for treason and hung. Twitter banned me for promoting violence against an individual. I'm talking about due process and utilizing the United States, you know, give the guy the presumption of innocence until he's proven guilty, but then prove him guilty and put him to death so that people don't engage in sedition and trying to overthrow the government and things like that. We're getting close to the end of our time here, Jaymie, so I just want to cover another topic that I know that people are familiar with a lot of the things that your father has brought up over the years, and I think they're going to be excited to know that you are carrying the mantle. He's spoken a lot about vaccination, and it's amazing for many people to see how, while your father through the years has been derided as a conspiracy theorist, and a lot of the things that are said about me and you and other people who are trying to raise awareness about this stuff, it's remarkable how much of what he's predicted we are living in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. He's talked for years about the use of an international crisis to change the status quo, to change the economic status of the world, which this pandemic has done beyond any recognition. I dread to think the unemployment statistics when this ends, if it ends. So yeah, it's changed the economic structure of the world forever. A lot of people that were self-sustained, that had their own businesses, that had their independent livelihoods and independent incomes, they won't have that anymore. They'll be dependent on the state. It's bringing more and more people down into that lower echelon of living paycheck to paycheck, which, you know, sadly in our society, money is choice, and money is, it's not freedom, but it's the freedom to make choices. The more money you have, the more choices you have. The less money you have, the less choices you have. It's kind of as simple as that in our society. I don't like that, but that's the way it is. We're in a more fortunate position here in the UK in that sense with healthcare. You don't have to pay for healthcare, but in America, the people that can't afford healthcare, literally they die. So it's I think in our society where money is the way it's used is absolutely disgusting, and it's used to keep people in servitude. And this is going to have brought a lot more people down into that, as I said, the lower part of the lower echelons where people are struggling. And if you're struggling, you're more susceptible to manipulation, and the state can control people need benefits. Okay, you can have the benefits, but it comes with this, it comes with that, it comes with that.
Right.
Potentially, right. If you want to have your state benefits, you need to get a vaccine. Which,
right.
You know, that's the case in Australia now. If you don't vaccinate your children, you don't get child benefit. That came in under Prime Minister Abbott, probably close to a decade ago. Prime Minister Tony Abbott. So It's no jab, no play.
But
Sorry, no
Jaymie,
jab.
what you're describing is another one of your father's premises, which is the totalitarian tiptoe. Basically, the concept of vaccinating a child sounds appealing to most parents. We're going to give them a shot that's going to prevent them from getting sick. Nobody wants their kid to get sick, so sure, give them the shot. And if this is going to enable some government benefits, a lot of people are going to just accept that. But now we're in this society where, I mean, look, I'm substantially older than you, and I've had a lot less vaccinations than certainly people who were even born 10 years, 20 years after me. Forget about what's going on now. There's so many, it's like hard to even understand. But now we're hearing even people who are supporters of President Trump, including myself, have been very troubled by his repetitive insistence that the vaccine is the cure for this COVID-19. There's been a remarkable application of the media, as we've been talking about, to convince people that treatments don't work, particularly not existing treatments that rely on off-patent drugs that are manufactured by lots of different companies at competitive prices and could make a treatment for something like this very economically accessible. They want to eliminate any thought or discussion about that and basically convince people that the vaccine is their only choice. And I don't want to get into a debate about socialism versus capitalism, but I would like to share a little bit of anecdotal information that contradicts one of the very few things you've said that I don't necessarily agree with. But a friend of mine in Los Angeles, who was an illegal immigrant from Canada, of all places, got hit by a train and almost died. And he received something like, I don't know, $800,000 worth of medical treatment. And because he had no health insurance and insufficient income to pay for it, the state of California covered it despite his status and despite no insurance. So the system in the United States is absolutely imperfect, but I'm not convinced that socializing it and putting it in the hands of the government is the way to fix it. I think, again, a lot of what's happening right now, as you said, is intended to force people into this really dependent kind of state where the only answer is some sort of handout from the government. Instead of going out and actually looking and seeing, are there a million dead people pouring out of the hospital? They don't want you to do that. They want you to stay home, be afraid, put on a mask, wait for your $1,200 check, shut up, and absculta. Listen and obey and pay your TV tax.
Yeah, they do. And my counter on the healthcare aspect, though, would be use this example of technology. So say I don't have a smartphone, say I never use one, I never go on the internet, but I get cancer because my neighbor does, and he's got Wi-Fi and he's got a smartphone, he's got this. So, and I have to pay for healthcare to get cancer treatment when it's been caused by something that's not my fault. Why should I pay for that?
Well,
When
it's a fair point.
When it's been caused by the government allowing unsafe technology to be rolled out, they should pay for it. I think possibly if we had a government where we trusted them and we actually felt they had the best interests of the nation and of the community at heart, you might feel differently. I think the fact that we have corrupt governments where treatments are suppressed, drug companies are the real rulers. Whether it's the American system or the British system, the drug companies are still the ones that run the system, really. So it doesn't really matter what the hospitals do. The drug companies are the rulers. If we had a system where that wasn't the case, I think maybe a social system where the healthcare was a birthright. I think that should be a birthright, in my opinion, because everybody is born differently. Some people are born with health problems from birth that are not their fault. They might be because of genetics. They might be because of parents eating, drinking, smoking the wrong things when they were pregnant. It might be because of abuse.
Just
it might
unlucky.
be just unlucky. You could get hit by a bus when you're 5 years old and be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. Why should you have to suffer the consequences for that? That's the way I look at it.
It's a complicated problem for sure, and I don't know that we're going to find the solution on this broadcast, but we are just about out of time. I want to remind people that they can see Jaymie Icke's new movie, Unnatural, by logging on to Ickonic.com, and it's important for people to remember the spelling. You can see it's Ickonic iconic.com. It's an alternative source for important information that people are going to want to become members of. You're not forced to do it as you would be in the United Kingdom if you wanted to watch something on the BBC, but it's a great way for people to gain access to information that is not paid for by a pharmaceutical company, a biological vaccine developer, the maker of Viagra, or some car, or some oil company, or something like that. Just like this channel, you, the viewers, are the sponsors. So I hope people will visit iconic.com. The movie's premiering tomorrow. Jaymie, anything else you want to share with us before we wrap up for today?
Yeah, I just want to share, as you can see from that image, you can get a 7-day free trial for the channel. So even if you log in and watch Unnatural and that's all you do, and then you turn your Wi-Fi off at night, then the film's done something to make an impact. And that's all I want to do. We want to start a debate, we want to start a conversation, and we want to cover topics that you only get to hear about one side in the mainstream. And one thing you mentioned, vaccinations, that's our next film. So
yeah,
we can maybe chat about that in December when that comes out too.
I look forward to that. I'm sure it's going to be a very informative film, and all the work that you've produced. I'm so impressed with the production quality of the film. It looks absolutely beautiful. So people are going to really enjoy seeing it, and they're going to learn a lot. Jaymie Icke, wonderful to have you back on the show. Best of luck, and we'll speak again soon.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me. Take care.
And thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day.